There are nights when the frost blooms like flowers on stone, and the bells toll for girls no one will miss. This is a story about one of those nights. About a king who sat on a black horse at dawn and counted the steps between himself and the thing he was forbidden to touch. About a girl in a white shift who ran through a winter forest with nothing but her wits and the memory of a kennel master's voice. About the moment when survival stops being enough, and you must choose between the cage you know and the freedom that might kill you. They dressed her like a bride. They called it mercy. They rang the iron bell 3 times and cut the silk from her wrists and sent her into the trees to die. What they did not know, what no one in that stone courtyard could have known, was that 6 years ago, she had saved a dying wolf with her own small hands, and the wolf had not forgotten. They thought he had come for a sacrifice. They thought the white shift they had dressed her in was a shroud. They thought the iron bell that tolled at dawn was tolling for a half-mad kennel girl no one would miss. What they did not know was that King Matthias of the Thornwell Pack had been riding south for 6 years looking for a scent he could not name, and that he had recognized it the moment Cassian Ravencroft's bare feet touched the dew on the stones, and that the only law in the world strong enough to bind his hands was the one that had brought him here. He sat very still on his horse, watched her walk between the rows of nobles, did not blink his warriors ranged behind him in their gray cloaks. Mistook the stillness for hunger. It was not hunger. It was a man counting the steps between himself and the girl he was forbidden to touch until sundown, and praying to gods he had stopped believing in that she remembered how to run. Cassian did not look at him. She looked at the bell tower, the black banner snapping above the gate. At her stepmother, Lady Isolde's gloved hands folded in pious satisfaction on the dais. She looked at everything except the king, because she had been told that to meet a Thornwell's eye was to invite the bite, and because she had spent 6 years learning that survival meant keeping your gaze low and your breath quiet. The shift they had dressed her in was thin enough that the wind moved through it like a hand. Her hair, washed and oiled for the first time in a year, hung loose down her back as though she were a bride. She did not feel like a bride. She felt like a deer at the edge of a field, ears tuned for the snap of a twig. A small voice in her head said, "Count the trees. Count the trees and find the wind." The voice that had kept her alive in the kennels through 6 winters of being called dangerous and broken and worse. The chamberlain read the offering aloud in the old tongue, his voice high and trembling. And Isolde smiled. The small, careful smile of a woman whose plans were settling into place like stones in a wall. Cassian did not understand the old tongue. She understood the smile. She had understood that smile since she was 11 years old. On the night her father had clutched at his throat at the long table, and Isolde had reached calmly for her wine cup, as though nothing were happening, as though Cassian were not standing in the doorway with her mouth open. Hands full of wildflowers she had picked to put on his pillow. She had screamed that night. They had called it a fit. They had called her dangerous. They had moved her down to the kennels because Isolde said gently to anyone who would listen, "The poor child is calmer with animals." And the animals do not mind her unfortunate moods. The animals had not minded her. That was true. The warhounds, great brindled brutes bred to track rogue wolves through ice and bramble, had loved her, with the uncomplicated devotion of creatures who knew when a hand was kind. They had also loved the wounded young wolf she had hidden beneath the straw on the night her father died, the one she had fed scraps and clean water and the heel of a stolen loaf for 9 nights running until he could stand on all 4 legs again, and slip out under the kennel wall before dawn. She had never told anyone. She had been 11 and grieving and half feral with shock, and the wolf had been the only living thing in the world that had looked at her without flinching. She had not even known he was a shifter. She had thought he was just a wolf. She thought of him now, walking between the rows of nobles with her hands tied loosely at the wrists with a length of white silk. That was meant to be cut at the forest's edge as part of the ritual. She thought of him because she was about to be released into a forest full of wolves, and the only kindness she had ever shown any of their kind was a child's kindness, 6 years old, forgotten by everyone who had survived it. She did not know that the wolf had not forgotten. She did not know that the wolf was the man on the black horse at the gate. Matthias watched her come, felt the bond he had not let himself name go taut in his chest. Like a wire pulled to the edge of breaking, his inner wolf, who'd been silent and surly for most of the ride south, was suddenly very awake and very loud. And what it was saying in the low, certain voice it used only for things that mattered was, ours, ours, ours. And you always knew, you had been riding for her since you could walk again. Matthias closed his eyes for one breath, opened them. He had ridden south expecting a gesture. The southern court of Ravencroft had been late on its tributes for 3 years running. The hunt offering was a humiliation, an old custom invoked to remind the lesser houses where the power lay. And he had not expected the southern lords to actually send a living person. He had expected them to weasel out, said a goat dressed in a veil, beg for an extension. He had been ready to laugh and accept the goat. He had not been ready for this. He had not been ready for the girl from the kennels, the girl whose scent had been mapped onto his bones since he was 16 years old and dying in the dark. The girl who had pressed her small, dirty palm against his muzzle and whispered, "Shh, you're safe." I won't tell, while the household tore itself apart above them over the master's body. The chamberlain finished reading. The silk at her wrists was cut. The bell tolled a second time. By the law of the hunt, which was older than any of the kingdoms standing here today, the offering had now been given. The king of Thornwell, host of the ritual, was bound to the starting line until sundown. He could not enter the forest. He could not call his warriors back. He could not even speak to the offering once the silk was cut, because the law forbade any communication that might guide her, advantage her, or warn her. He could only watch. The 4 warriors who had ridden down with him dismounted, stripped to the waist, rolled their shoulders, grinned at one another the way young men do when they think they're about to do something glorious to Clan. Jasper, Ash, Briar, they did not know. They did not know what he knew. They saw a girl in a white shift, barefoot rice pink from the silk. Eyes lowered, they saw an easy hunt and a story to tell. Matthias wanted to kill them. He wanted to kill them so badly his hands shook on the reins, and his inner wolf was a low rolling growl behind his teeth. And the only thing keeping him on the horse was the knowledge that if he moved, if he so much as dismounted, he would break the law that was the one and only thing protecting her, because the rest of the law, the part the southern court did not know, the part Isolde and her clever, poisonous certainty had never bothered to learn, was this: the prey who survived until sundown was declared chosen by the forest, untouchable, unmarriageable against her will, beyond the reach of any house, any contract, any father, any stepmother ever again. If Cassian lived until the sun touched the western ridge, no one in any kingdom under the old laws could ever own her, or sell her, or silence her again, including him, especially him. He had to let her run. He had to let his warriors hunt her. He had to sit on this horse and listen to the woods all day, and trust that the girl who had hidden him under straw at 11 years old knew how to outrun wolves at 17. The bell tolled the 3rd time. Cassian lifted her face for the first time, and looked not at him, but at the trees behind him, and her eyes were gray and clear and entirely awake, and Matthias realized with a thud beneath his ribs that she was already counting trees, counting wind, counting the distance between the dais and the tree line and the angle of the sun. Good girl, his wolf said softly. Good girl. Run. She ran when the silk fell, not before, not after. The instant the white silk slipped past her wrist and pulled at her ankles, she was already in motion, low and quick, angling not toward the obvious gap in the tree line, but toward a denser bramble patch to its left. And Matthias knew at once she had been planning her route since the moment they walked her out of the gate. Of course she had. She was the kennel girl. She had been raised among hunting hounds. She had spent 6 years watching deer break for cover, and rabbits double back and foxes lay false trails through the kitchen yard. She had been studying prey her whole life. Behind him, his 4 warriors made the small, surprised noise of men whose hunt had not gone the way they pictured it in the first 3 seconds, and then they were laughing and stretching and pulling off their boots. And Matthias wanted to put his fist through each of their throats. The rules of the hunt allowed them 5 minutes grace, 5 minutes for the prey to put distance between themselves and the line, then the warriors could enter the wood. Then they could shift, or not shift by their preference. Then the day belonged to whoever was faster. 5 minutes. Matthias counted them in his teeth. He counted by the swing of the bell rope, which was still trembling from the third toll. He counted by the shape of his own breath. He did not look at the southern court on the dais, because he was afraid of what his face would do. He stared at the dark line of the trees where she had vanished, and he made himself sit, and his wolf paced inside him like a thing in a cage. Cassian ran. The bramble tore her shift along the calf almost at once, and she did not stop. She did not feel the cold. The cold was a courtesy she could not afford. The forest closed over her like a held breath, and she was inside it. And the inside of the forest was not the white and silver theater the courtyard had been. The inside of the forest was loam and pine and the iron tang of old water and 100 small green smells she could not name. And somewhere far off, a single magpie clattering its alarm. She ran along the bramble until she found the deer track she had been looking for. She had not seen this forest before in her life, but every forest had a deer track, and every deer track went to water. And water meant rocks, and rocks meant scent breaks. She had learned this from Master Gareth, Old Gareth, before he died of the lung sickness, and Isolde replaced him with a man who slept off his ale by noon. Master Gareth had taught her how a hound thinks. "Tell me how a hound thinks, child," he used to say, polishing the long lead leashes by the fire, and you'll never lose anything, hound or quarry, that doesn't want to be found. She had been 9 years old. She remembered every word. She thought of him now as she ran, his big knuckled hands, his patient smoke-roughened voice. And she said inside her own head, "All right, Gareth. All right, tell me how a wolf thinks." The deer track dipped. She followed it. She did not run in a straight line. Straight lines were for prey that panicked. She ran in long curving arcs, doubling once at a fallen birch, and then again at a stand of holly, laying her scent thick in one direction, and then her body in another. She kicked through a patch of wild garlic on purpose, hard enough to crush the leaves, because she remembered the hounds in the kennel sneezing and shaking their heads when the cook brought green garlic in from the garden. Maybe wolves were not hounds. Maybe they were not bothered by green garlic at all. But she had nothing else. And any scent confusion was better than none. The forest sloped. She let it. She angled south of the slope toward the sound of running water that her ears had picked up 2 minutes back. And when she reached the stream, she did not cross it. She stepped into it instead and walked upstream against the current for as long as her legs would hold her. The water was so cold it stopped meaning anything after the first step. She felt her toes go from pain to numb to gone. She kept walking. Behind her, very far behind her now, a long howl rose from the forest edge and was answered by another and another. The 5 minutes were up. They were coming. She did not stop. She found a flat stone slab where the stream turned, and she stepped out onto it, water streaming from her shift, and she did not let her foot touch the leaf litter at the edge. She jumped from stone to stone like a child in a game until she could swing herself onto a low oak branch and pull her wet, scraped, bleeding body up off the ground entirely. She climbed until the branch she was standing on was no thicker than her wrist, and her breath was tearing at her lungs. And then she lay down along the branch, on her stomach, cheek against the bark, arms wrapped around the wood like a lover, and she made herself stop panting, slow it. She told her own ribs, slow it. Hounds find the breath before they find the body. She had no idea if wolves did the same. She had to gamble. From this branch 20 feet up, she could see a long way through the bare crowns. She could see, very small in the distance, the line of stones that marked the forest's edge. She could see the days. She could see, even from here, the king on his black horse, still sitting where she had left him. She could not see his face, but the way he sat, motionless, hands flat on his thighs. Head lifted toward the trees made her think suddenly, and with no reason at all, of a great hound on a leash, tracking a sound only it could hear. She thought, why isn't he hunting me? She thought, why is he just sitting there? She did not have time to think more. The first warrior broke through the brambles below her, and he was not in human shape any longer. She saw the dark gray blur of him, the lowered head, the easy, wrong-jointed lope of a wolf the size of a pony. And she pressed her face against the bark and stopped breathing entirely. He had her scent. Of course he did. She had known he would. The wolf circled the base of her oak twice, snuffling at the leaf litter, and she watched him through the screen of her own hair and thought very calmly, this is the moment. If he looks up, this is the moment. He did not look up. Wolves, like hounds, do not naturally look up. They are made for the ground. The world they read is the world at nose height. Raster Gareth had told her that too. A treed quarry is a saved quarry, child, until the dogs learn better. And most never do, the wolf below her snorted. Shook his head as if the wild garlic had finally caught up with him and trotted off downstream, following the false scent she had laid through the crushed leaves. She did not move. She did not move for what felt like an hour, and was probably 2 minutes. Then very slowly she shifted her weight along the branch until she could see in the other direction, and she began to plan the next move. The forest was thicker to the north. The slope rose to a ridge, crowned with old standing stones she had glimpsed from the dais. Standing stones meant high ground. High ground meant sight lines. Sight lines meant she could see them coming. She would have to come down out of the tree to get there, and coming down was always worse than going up, because coming down put your scent back on the ground. In a fresh print, they could read like a page. She would need another scent break. She thought of the stream, and of the wild garlic, and of the soft moss she had passed on the way up. She thought of her own blood, which was beating along her calf where the bramble had caught her. Blood was useless. Blood was a beacon. She tore a strip from the hem of her shift with her teeth, and bound her calf as tight as she could, one-handed. The white cloth went red almost at once. She tore another strip down by the trunk of the oak. Very faintly, she heard a second wolf pad past. This one larger and lighter colored, and she held her breath again until he too was gone. 2 of them then, maybe all 4 were already in the wood, maybe more. She could not stay in the tree. The trees would be the first thing they checked once they realized she had broken her trail at the stream. She had perhaps one window. She took it. She came down the oak in a control fall branch to branch, and the moment her feet hit the ground, she was running again, north and uphill, toward the standing stones. Behind her, far down the slope, she had heard a wolf cry out in surprise, and another answered, and she knew her false trail had broken, and they were casting about for the real one. She had minutes, maybe seconds. She ran. Down at the line, Matthias sat on his horse and listened. The southern court had begun to disperse, the way crowds disperse when the spectacle is over. And the consequence is somebody else's. Lady Isolde had been the last to go, lingering long enough to catch his eye. With a small, triumphant smile, the kind of smile a woman gives when she has placed a bet she is sure she has already won. Matthias had not returned the smile. He had memorized her face. He had, in fact, done nothing for the past quarter of an hour but sit and listen, because the ritual bound his body, but not his ears. And a Thornwell Alpha's ears were not ordinary ears. He could hear the stream. He could hear the wind in the high branches. He could hear, 2 minutes ago, the faint tear of cloth against bramble. That meant she had reached the deer track. He had heard her step into the water and not come out again on the other side, and his chest had loosened by exactly 1 breath. Because that meant she had not panicked. That meant she was thinking. That meant she was the same girl she had been at 11, the one who had pressed her hand to his muzzle and said, "Shh." He could hear the howls. He could read them. The first howl had been Briar, his youngest warrior, the one with the most to prove. The second had been Jasper, eager and clumsy. The third and fourth had been the older 2, Declan and Ash, more careful. More dangerous, Declan was the one to worry about. Declan did not run hot. Declan would not be fooled by garlic. Declan would think his way through the false trail in less time than she could climb. Matthias sat on his horse and felt every muscle in his back lock into stone. His wolf was past growling now. His wolf was a low, continuous song behind his ribs, a song without words, the kind a wolf sings to a thing that is its own. He wanted to shift. He wanted to go in. He wanted to find Declan and put him on the ground by the throat, until the rest of his warriors understood that this hunt was done, and the law could have his crown if it wanted it. He did not move. He did not move because he had been raised, since he was a boy in his father's hall, on one single principle. The law that protects everyone protects no one if a king can break it for love. If he stepped off the line, he saved her today. If he sat on the line, he saved her forever, untouchable, unmarriageable against her will, beyond Isolde's reach. Beyond his own reach, beyond any reach, he sat, and his hands stayed flat on his thighs, and he listened to her run. A small page boy in southern livery, perhaps 8 years old, had crept up to the line of stones at his horse's feet. Thrown the way small things are drawn to large, still ones, the boy was holding a wooden carving, a clumsy little wolf. The kind a child whittles with a borrowed knife. He stared up at Matthias with enormous, unafraid eyes. The wolf is supposed to win, the boy said, very quietly, as if confiding. That's how the song goes. My Nan sings it. The wolf is supposed to win. Matthias looked down at him. He was not allowed to speak about the hunt. He was allowed to speak about a song. The wolf wins, he said, low and rough, in the voice he had not used out loud since dawn, but not the way you think. The boy thought about that. Nodded slowly, the way children nod when they have decided to keep a secret for a stranger. Then he held the carving up. For luck, the boy said, and tucked it into the top of Matthias's boot, and ran off toward the kitchens before any adult could scold him for it. Matthias did not move his foot. He did not look down at the carving, but his hand, where it rested on his thigh, opened and closed once, very slowly, like a man remembering how to breathe. Up on the ridge, Cassian reached the standing stones and almost wept. They were taller than she had thought from the dais, 3 of them, lichen-furred, leaning toward each other like old women, sharing a secret. Between them the ground was beaten flat. And at their feet, the wind moved differently, in a slow circling way that smelled of nothing. Old places, Master Gareth had said once, holding a hound back from a barrow. Old places eat scent. Don't ask me how, child, but they do. She did not ask how. She walked into the circle of the stones and felt at once that the air there was older than the air outside it, and her own pulse, which had been hammering, slowed by 1 full beat. She crouched against the largest stone, put her back to it, and made herself look. From here, she could see down the long slope she had climbed, and across to the dais, and back into the tangle of forest she had crossed. She saw a flicker of gray moving along the stream. Declan, she saw. Further off, a smaller, darker shape angling up the slope toward her. Jasper, she guessed. The young one, the eager one, the one most likely to make a mistake. She took stock. Her shift was torn, soaked at the hem, sticking to her thighs where the cold had numbed them. Her calf was bleeding through the bandage. Her hands were scraped from the oak. She was barefoot, weaponless, and at least 4 hours from sundown. She had no food, no fire. No second skin to throw them off her trail. What she had was the ridge. She had the standing stones, which apparently ate scent. She had a steep slope below her, and a steeper one behind. She had wind that moved in circles. She had her brain. She had Master Gareth, dead these 3 years, telling her in his patient, smoke-rue voice that there were 2 ways to lose a hound. Outrun it, which no one could, or outthink it, which a child could, if the child was patient. She set herself to be patient. She watched Jasper come up the slope. He was running on 4 legs, but loose, sloppy, casting his nose left and right. He had not yet found the real trail. He was guessing. She let him come. When he was perhaps 30 yards below the ridge, still uncertain, she stood up from behind the stone and waved. Yes, she waved. She lifted her arm and made a wide, slow motion, as if she were calling a dog in from a field, and his head came up at once. Because movement up high catches a wolf's eye, and he saw her, and he committed. He came up the slope in a straight, charging line, exactly what she needed. She turned and ran, not back into the circle of the stones, but along the ridge to the east, where she had seen, 2 minutes earlier, the lip of an old slate slide. The slope there was nearly vertical for 15 feet, a tumble of loose gray shale, and below it, the ground was thick with bracken. She had no plan past this point. She had only the slope. She reached the lip and threw herself down it sideways, half running, half sliding, riding the shale like a board, and behind her she heard Jasper hit the top of the ridge at full charge and not stop in time. He went over the edge. He did not slide. He fell. She heard the wet animal sound of him hitting the bracken hard and the shorter, sharper sound of something in him breaking, and then a long, thin whine that meant pain, but not death. She did not look back. She found her feet at the bottom of the slope, staggered through the bracken, and ran behind her. Jasper was whining and trying to drag himself upright. Ahead of her, the forest opened into a long, shallow basin, and beyond the basin, she could see the silver flash of a larger river. A river, real water, wide water. She ran for it. Down at the line, Matthias heard the whine and went very still. He knew that voice. Jasper, hurt, not dead. Off the hunt, one down, he let his eyes close for half a breath. His wolf laughed inside him, a short, pleased huff. Smart girl, his wolf said. Took out the puppy first. Smart, smart girl. The other warriors heard it too. He could tell by the way the howling changed, from triumphant to wary. Declan threw a single low note that meant regroup, and Briar answered it, And Ash answered last, slower. From further off than Matthias had expected, so Ash had gone wide. Ash was thinking. Ash was the second danger. And Ash was now somewhere Matthias could not place. He hated this. He hated sitting. He hated the small wooden wolf in his boot. Pressing against his ankle like an accusation, the afternoon light had begun to slant. They were not yet halfway through the day. He thought about his father, dead 12 years now, and what his father would have said about a king who sat on the line while a woman he could not stop calling mine ran for her life, through woods full of his own warriors. His father would have said, "That is exactly what a king does." His father would have said, "The law is the only thing that makes you better than the wolves who made you." His father would also have said, very quietly, after, "And I am sorry, my son. I am sorry that being better costs what it costs." Matthias sat on his horse and let the cost happen. And then from somewhere behind him on the dais, a voice spoke, an old voice, a woman's voice, smoke-proof and patient, and entirely unbothered by the presence of a king. She's the daughter, you know. Matthias did not turn, but his spine went tight. "Warden Brenna," he said, very low. His grandmother stepped up beside his horse, 68 years old, leaning on a gnarled walking stick, gray hair braided in a crown, eyes the color of winter ice. And wearing the simple brown cloak she always wore when she did not want to be recognized as a Thornwell. She had clearly been in the crowd this whole time, and he had not known, which meant she had not wanted him to know. "The daughter," she said again, as if he had asked, which he had not. "Riel's daughter. I'd know that walk anywhere. The way she moves. Healer instincts. Even if she doesn't know it yet," Matthias felt something cold settle in his gut. "Riel," he said flat. Brenna looked up at him. "My friend. The last healer warden before me. Died giving birth to that girl 17 years ago. If she lives today, I will train her. As I should have trained her mother." Matthias said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Because the girl he had been riding south to find for 6 years, the girl who had saved him, was not just the girl who had saved him. She was the daughter of a line everyone thought had ended, a line his grandmother had spent 50 years protecting. And hiding. "And mourning, does she know?" he asked. His voice did not sound like his own. Brenna shook her head. Isolde kept her in the dark, on purpose. A trained warden would have seen through Isolde at a glance. Would have known what the woman was, what she'd done. So Isolde broke the girl instead, called her mad, locked her away, kept the gift from ever waking. Matthias looked back at the trees, at the ridge where Cassian had vanished. "It's waking now," he said. Brenna smiled, small and grim. "Yes," she said. "It is." She turned to go, then paused, looked back at him. "You care for her," she said, not a question. Matthias did not answer. Brenna's smile softened just a fraction. "Good," she said, "because what's coming for her, she'll need someone who cares. More than the law, more than the crown, more than anything." And then she was gone, back into the crowd, and Matthias sat on his horse and felt the weight of what she had just told him settle onto his shoulders like a coat of iron. The forest, Cassian ran. She reached the river, waded into her waist before the current took her, and she let it. She let the river carry her 200 yards downstream while she kicked toward the far bank. And when her feet finally caught on stones again, she crawled out, shaking, and sat on the gravel for 10 ragged breaths, because her body simply would not run any further until she let it have those breaths. She looked at the sky. The sun was past its peak, maybe 2 hours of light left, maybe less. She got up, she kept moving. Behind her, somewhere upstream, she heard Declan's howl take on a new pitch. The pitch of a wolf who has lost the trail entirely and is angry about it. She allowed herself, for 1 second, a small grim grin, then she ran on. The light began to thin. It was the kind of thinning that promises an end without yet delivering it. The long gray gold hour before sundown, when the air goes soft and the shadows go long, and a frightened animal believes for a moment that it might live. Cassian did not let herself believe it. Master Gareth had warned her about that too. The hour before dusk, child, is when the prey relaxes. That is, when the smart hounds catch them. Don't relax. Don't relax until your back is to a wall and the lamp is lit. She did not relax. She moved through the lower forest at a steady half jog, keeping to the wettest ground she could find, leaving as little of herself behind as possible. She had stopped bleeding at the calf. Her feet were so cold she could not feel where the cuts ended and the soles began. Her shift was rags. Her hair had come loose entirely and was full of leaves and burrs. And somewhere along the river, She had lost the silver pin Isolde had set in it that morning, a pin that had cost more than Cassian had ever held in her hand. She found that she did not care about the pin. She did not care about Isolde. She did not. She realized with a small, clear, inward shock, even care about being clean. She cared about the line of stones at the forest's edge, and the bell that would ring at sundown, and the question of whether she would be on the right side of those stones when it did. She thought, with a kind of bitter humor that surprised her, that if she lived through this, she would never again be afraid of a chamberlain. She pushed on, 2 down by her count. She had not seen Briar for over an hour, but she had heard him cross her trail twice and lose it both times. And the second time he had howled with a frustration so personal it almost made her feel sorry for him. Declan was the one she had not pinned. Declan was somewhere ahead of her, or beside her, or above her, and she did not know which. And that was the problem with Declan Ashe. She had pinned. Ashe had gone wide. Ashe had cut north along the river to head her off at the narrow ford, and she had seen him from a stand of alders, slim and pale and silent, moving like a thought across the bank. And she had immediately turned south instead. Ashe was still hunting her. He just was not where he thought she was. That left Declan the light thinned further. The sky above the canopy went from gold to honey, to the deep peach that meant the sun was almost touching the western ridge. She could not see the ridge from down here, but she could feel it, the way one feels the cooling of a forge. She had, perhaps, a quarter of an hour. She had to get back to the line. The line was south and east of where she now stood, and between her and it was a thicket of thorn and a long open meadow that she had been avoiding all day because it offered no cover. She would have to cross the meadow. There was no other route that brought her back to the stones in time. She crouched at the edge of the meadow and looked across it. It was perhaps 100 yards of open grass, gold in the slanting light, with a single oak in the middle that had been struck by lightning some years past and stood as a black, charred finger beyond it, the dark line of the trees that she had run out of this morning. Beyond those, the dais. She did not see Declan. That was the problem. She did not see him, which meant he was either very far off or very close. She thought about it for 10 seconds. 10 seconds was all she had, and she stepped out of the thicket and ran. He came out of the long grass. Of course he did. He had been lying in the grass the whole time, downwind, perfectly still. In the one place she had not thought to look, because she had not believed any wolf would have the patience for it. Declan had the patience. Declan rose up out of the grass like a gray wave when she was 30 yards in. And he came at her low and fast and silent. No howl, no warning, the way old wolves take elk. She had a second. She used it. She did not run for the trees. She would not make the trees, and she knew it. She ran for the lightning oak. She reached it half a stride before he reached her, and she did the only thing left to do, which was throw herself behind the trunk, put her back against the charred wood, and grab the only weapon the meadow had given her, a long, splintered branch the lightning had broken off and left lying in the grass at the oak's foot. It was almost as tall as she was, jagged at one end where the wood had torn. She came up from the ground with it in both hands, like a spear. Declan skidded around the trunk, jaws wide, and ran himself onto it. Not all the way. She did not have the strength for that. But the splintered end caught him in the soft place under the jaw, and his own momentum drove the wood 3 inches into him. And he yelped an astonished, almost human yelp, and recoiled, twisting his head, ripping the branch out of her hands, and out of himself. In the same motion, he landed a yard from her, bleeding, snarling, real fury in his eyes now. And she had no weapon left, and the meadow was very wide. And then something inside her chest opened, something she had felt all day as a small high singing she had been ignoring. It was as if a door she had not known had been kicked off its hinges. The singing in her chest became a roar. Heat moved up her arms in a fast rushing line. Not the burn of a fire, but the warm pour of sunlight through window glass, and her hands, her scraped, mud-streaked, bleeding hands, flooded with a soft white gold light. That was not flame, and not lamplight, and not anything she had ever seen before. She had time to think, this is what they meant. Then Declan lunged again, and she lifted her hands without knowing why. And the light went out of her in a wave, and it hit him not like fire, but like a great soft palm. And he was knocked backwards across the meadow and rolled twice and came up shaking his head, ears flat, a stunned, wounded look in his eyes. And he did not come at her again. He turned. He ran. He ran in a straight line away from her, low to the ground, and his howl as he ran was not a hunting howl. It was a howl of I yield. It was a howl every wolf in the forest understood, and Matthias. On his horse a quarter-mile away heard it, and felt his whole body go loose for the first time since dawn. Cassian stood in the meadow, light still pouring from her palms, and looked down at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The light was already fading. She could feel it draining out of her like water through a sieve. And her knees were trying to give. She did not let them. Not yet, not here, not in the open where anything could see. She walked. She walked the rest of the meadow on legs that were not entirely her own. And she walked into the trees. And she walked the long path between the trees that led back to the line of stones. And somewhere behind her in the gathering dusk, a fourth howl rose. Ash this time, also yielding, also withdrawing. And Briars followed a moment later, smaller, shamefaced, and there was no wolf at all in the woods now between her and the line. And she walked, and she walked, and the bell at the edge of the forest began to toll. She came out of the trees at the last toll. The sun was just touching the western ridge, a sliver of red light bleeding across the sky, and the courtyard had filled again, thrown back by the sound of the bell, and by some message run from warrior to warrior that the hunt was over, and done in a way no one had expected. The southern lords were on the dais, Isolde was on the dais, the chamberlain was on the dais with his book open and his mouth open, and Matthias was on the line. He had not moved all day. His horse stood where it had stood at dawn. His hands were flat on his thighs. The small wooden wolf the page boy had given him was still tucked into the top of his boot. He saw her come out of the trees, and his whole face did not change, which was for him an expression so violent that Declan, who had limped back to the line 10 minutes earlier, and was sitting in human shape with a strip of cloth pressed to his throat, looked at his king once, and then looked very firmly at the ground. Cassian stepped over the line of stones. There was no sound in the courtyard at all. Then the bell tolled the final time, marking sundown, and the chamberlain, in a voice that wavered like a candle, read out the old words, the words that meant the offering had not been taken, the words that meant the forest had chosen, the words that meant she stood now under a protection older than any house in any kingdom. Isolde's face went the color of skimmed milk. Cassian looked at her stepmother across the long stretch of stones. For the first time since dawn, she did not smile. She did not have to. Isolde's hand had gone to her own throat, as if she could feel a noose tightening there, and perhaps she could, because the chamberlain was still reading. And the words he was reading in the old tongue were words Isolde had heard in her cradle, and ignored as relics, and he was getting to the part about the forest chosen being beyond the contracts and dispositions of any household, including those of guardians, including those of stepmothers. And Isolde was beginning very slowly to understand that she had not just lost a sacrificial pawn, she had lost her hold. Cassian looked away from her. She looked at Matthias. He had dismounted finally. Now that the law allowed it, he stood at the line of stones with his hands open at his sides, and his head lowered slightly. And she realized with a strange swimming feeling in her ribs that he was not approaching her. He was waiting for her to approach him, if she chose. He did not assume. He stood there, the Alpha King of Thornwell, the man whose name had been used to frighten her since she was a child, and he waited for a barefoot kennel girl to decide whether to walk over. She walked over. She did not know why. She walked because her legs would carry her 10 more steps, and no further. And because the only solid thing in her field of vision was him, she crossed the space between the stones and the horse, and when she got close enough, she saw that his eyes were not the eyes she had expected. They were not yellow. They were gray, like winter water, and they were wet. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her. He said very quietly, in a voice that was rougher than the one she had imagined him having, "You laid garlic." She blinked at him. "The least clever among my warriors got a noseful of it and lost you for an hour." That was good. She felt something in her face want to laugh, which was absurd because she had nearly died 9 times today, and was standing in front of the man people called the Beast of Thornwell, and he was complimenting her fieldcraft. The laugh did not come out as a laugh. It came out as a single dry sound that might have been a sob. He saw it, and his hand twitched at his side, and he did not lift it. "May I?" he said. She did not understand what he was asking. He clarified, "May I put my coat on you?" Your shift is wet, and you are shaking, and I will not touch you without your word." She stared at him. He stared back. Behind him, somewhere on the dais, Isolde was making a noise of protest that was being efficiently silenced by other nobles, who had finally understood what the chamberlain had read aloud. The world was very quiet around the question he had asked. Cassian said, "Yes." He took off his coat, the long black wool one with the silver clasps, and he set it around her shoulders without his fingers ever brushing her skin. And the coat was so warm from his body that she made a small, involuntary sound against it. Then he said, also quietly, "I have a thing to tell you." "But not here." She nodded. She did not have words. He turned to his warriors and said, in a voice that was suddenly the king's voice and not the man's, "We ride at dawn." All four of them flinched. Declan, his throat bandaged, lifted his head and met his king's eyes and said, "My king?" "We dishonored." Matthias looked at him for a long moment. "You hunted as you were sworn to hunt," he said. "You hunted well. You lost. Be glad you lost." Declan, who was perhaps not a fool after all, bowed his head. Then Matthias turned back to Cassian and said, "The offering is fulfilled. The forest is chosen. By every law I am sworn to, you are now free of every claim ever made on you, including..." He added, with a small, grim look toward the dacehers. Cassian did not look at Isolde. She did not need to. She said, "Where will I go?" Matthias was silent for a beat. He said, "Anywhere you wish, including," he said more carefully, "north, with my pack, as a guest, under my hand until you decide. No claim, no bond, a roof, a room, a door that locks from your side. The choice is wholly yours." She thought about it. The thinking took her perhaps 4 breaths. Then she said, "Yes." North, he closed his eyes for 1 breath, only 1, and when he opened them, he said, "Thank you." The journey north began at dawn, but Cassian did not remember much of the first day or the second, because somewhere between the courtyard and the wagon that had been prepared for her, her body had finally decided it was done. And she had collapsed into Matthias's arms like a puppet with its strings cut. She woke 3 days later in a bed that was not hers, in a room that smelled of herbs and wood smoke, and a woman with brown hair and quick hands was sitting beside her. Checking her pulse. "There you are," the woman said. Her voice was brisk. No nonsense. The kind of voice that did not allow for argument. "I'm Willa, healer, Matthias's cousin. You've been out for 72 hours. Drink this." She held a cup to Cassian's lips. Cassian drank. It tasted like dirt and mint and something bitter underneath. She made a face. Willa smiled. "I know. It's terrible. Drink it anyway." Cassian finished the cup and lay back against the pillows, which were softer than anything she had slept on in 6 years. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice came out like gravel. "Still 5 days south of Thornwell," Willa said. "We're moving slow because you need rest. Matthias has been." She paused. "Concerned? Where is he?" "Riding ahead. Keeping distance. Because he's not an idiot and knows that the last thing you need right now is a king hovering over you like a worried hound." Willa stood, smoothed the blanket. "But he'll want to know you're awake. I'll send word. You rest," and she was gone. Cassian lay in the bed and looked at the ceiling of the wagon, which was painted stars. Constellations. Someone had taken the time to paint the inside of a traveling wagon with stars. She thought about that. And then she thought about the way Matthias had looked at her when she came out of the trees. And then she thought about the light that had poured from her hands, and then she stopped thinking. Because thinking was too much. And she was so very tired. She woke again at nightfall to the sound of someone moving quietly near the wagon. She sat up too fast, the world tilted. She steadied herself against the side of the bed and looked out through the gap in the canvas, a fire small, carefully banked. And sitting beside it, with his back to a tree and a whetstone in his hand, was Matthias sharpening a knife, very slowly, very methodically, as though he had been doing it for hours and had nothing better to do. Cassian watched him. For longer than she meant to. There was something hypnotic about the way he moved, the slow drag of the blade across the stone, the careful attention, the way his shoulders were set. Not tense, but not relaxed either, as though he were holding himself very still on purpose. He looked up as if he had felt her watching. Their eyes met across the fire. He set down the knife, stood, came to the wagon, stopped a few feet awake. He said, "Yes." Willa said, "You drank the tea?" "Yes." "Good." A pause. He looked like he wanted to say something else, and did not know how. Cassian said, "Thank you." He frowned. "For what?" "For the coat. For the wagon." "For?" She gestured vaguely at the space around her. "All of this," Matthias shook his head. "You owe me no thanks. You survived. That's what matters. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, "There's something I need to tell you about what happened in the meadow. About the light." Cassian felt her stomach tighten. I don't know what that was," she said. Matthias said, "I do." And then he told her about her mother, Riel, who had been a healer warden, the last of a line that stretched back 1,000 years. To the women who had stood against corrupted magic in the northern forests and healed what others broke and paid for it with their lives. He told her that Riel had exhausted herself the week before Cassian was born, healing a village stricken with plague, alone, without help, because the other wardens were dead or in hiding, and she had gone anyway, because that was what healer wardens did, and she had died giving birth, not because childbirth was dangerous, but because she had nothing left. He told her that Isolde was Rielle's younger sister, and that Isolde had begged Rielle, as children, to share the gift, to teach her, to give her the light. And Rielle had said she could not, because the gift was born. Not taught, not given, not earned, and Isolde had smiled and said she understood. And then Rielle had married Lord Ravencroft, and had a daughter who carried the gift in her blood, and Isolde's smile had turned to something else. "She kept you in the kennels," Matthias said. "Not because you were mad, but because she was afraid. Afraid that if you were trained, you would see her for what she was. Afraid that you would become what your mother had been. Powerful, loved, everything she was not." Cassian sat very still, processing. Her mother, a healer warden, Isolde, her aunt, not just her stepmother, her aunt, who had hated her, not for what she had done, but for what she was born to be. "How do you know all this?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Matthias said, "My grandmother told me. Warden Brenna, she was your mother's friend, the only other warden left alive. She recognized you the moment you stepped into the courtyard, by the way you moved. Said you had your mother's walk." Cassian felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain, not exactly. "Something older than pain, my mother," she said, and could not finish the sentence. Matthias nodded. "Brenna wants to meet you. When you're ready. She has things to tell you." "Things your mother left behind?" Cassian looked down at her hands, at the palms that had glowed gold in the meadow. "What am I?" she asked. Matthias said, "You're the last of a line we thought ended 17 years ago. He paused, then added, very quietly, "And you're the girl who saved my life when I was 16. Cassian looked up at him, sharply. "What?" He met her eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "The wolf in your kennel," he said. 6 years ago, that was me." They reached Thornwell 8 days later. The city was smaller than she had expected, and older, built mostly of dark stone that had been weathered to the color of slate. There were no gates. There were standing stones at the road, the way her ridge had had standing stones, and the air around the stones moved in the same slow circling way. She understood, as the wagon rolled past them, that the city was protected, the way her ridge had protected her, and that this had been quietly true all her life, and she had just not known it. She was given a room. The room had a door that locked from her side. It had a window that opened onto a small courtyard where an old yew tree grew out of a cleft of stones. And beneath the yew, there was a wooden bench, worn smooth by years of sitting. On the bench, on the morning after she arrived, she found a small carved wooden wolf, no bigger than her palm, with a chip out of one ear. She picked it up, turned it over. There was no note. She did not need one. She put the wolf on her windowsill, where she could see it from the bed, and she went down to find him. She found him in the courtyard with his sleeves rolled up, doing something to the brickwork around the well. He was repointing it badly with mortar that had clearly been mixed by someone who knew what they were doing in theory, but not in practice. He looked up when she came out. He had a smear of gray across one cheek. He said, before she could speak, "I am not good at this. I started it as something to do with my hands," she said. "You are the king," he said. "I am also a man with hands." He set down the trowel, looked at her, did not move toward her. He never moved toward her first. She had noticed. He always waited. She walked across the courtyard and stopped a foot away from him and looked up. He was very tall. She had not let herself notice how tall before. She said, "The wolf on the bench," he said. "I carved one a year. Starting the year I turned 16. I didn't always know who they were for. There are 6 others. Penn at your courtyard had one. Willa has one. The one on your windowsill is the 7th. She said, "Why 7? He said, "Because I started carving them when I was 16. recovering from silver in a cave 100 miles north of your house. And I have not stopped, she thought about that. She lifted her hands slowly and put her fingers against the smear of mortar on his cheek and brushed it away. He went absolutely still under her hand, eyes closed. She felt his pulse jump under his jaw, where her thumb was. He said hoarsely, Cassian, Cassian. He had not used her name before. He had said offering and forest chosen and you. And she had not realized until this moment that he had been holding her name in his mouth for 8 days. And not letting it out, she felt her own breath catch. She said, you can say it. He opened his eyes. He said, Cassian. He said it as if it were a word he had been afraid to break. The weeks that followed were quiet, quieter than anything she had known in 6 years. She had a room, a door that locked, a window that looked out on a yew tree, and a bench where she could sit in the mornings and watch the light change. Willa brought her clothes, real clothes, not rags, not cast-offs, dresses in soft greens and grays, a cloak lined with fur, boots that fit, and on the 3rd day, a comb. Cassian had wept over the comb, for reasons she could not explain. And Willa had sat with her and said nothing, and let her cry. On the 5th day, Warden Brenna came. She was an old woman, 68, with gray hair braided in a crown and eyes the color of winter ice, and a walking stick she did not seem to need. But carried anyway, she looked at Cassian for a long moment, then said, You have your mother's eyes, Cassian said. I never knew her, Brenna said. I know. Sit with me. I will tell you. And she did. She told Cassian about Riel. Ho had been kind and fierce and reckless with her own life when it came to helping others who had known she was dying in those last hours, and chose Cassian anyway. She loved you before you were born, Brenna said. Talked to you, sang to you, told you stories. Cassian could not speak. Brenna reached into her cloak and pulled out a small leather-bound book, her journal, she said. I kept it for you. For when you were ready, Cassian took it with shaking hands, opened it. The first entry was dated 18 years ago. In a slanted, careful hand, today I healed a child no physician could save. The light took so much from me. But her mother's smile fed me for a week. The last entry was dated the day before she died. If you are reading this, little bird, know. The gift asks everything. Give it willingly. That is how you survive. Cassian closed the book and held it against her chest. And Brenna said gently, she would be proud of you. What you did in that meadow. Protecting yourself, that was her gift. Used the way it was meant to be used. I don't know how to control it, Cassian said. Brenna smiled. That's why I'm here. The training began the next day in the courtyard under the yew tree. Brenna did not start with the light. She started with breathing. Before we touch power, she said, we heal the heart. The light comes from here. She tapped Cassian's chest. If the heart is broken, the light will be too. So they sat and breathed and talked about Riel, about Isolde, about what it meant to carry a gift that others feared, about the 6 years Cassian had spent in the kennels, thinking she was mad. You were not mad, Brenna said. You were grieving and trapped and lied to. That is not madness. That is survival, Cassian said. I screamed. Brenna said, because your father was murdered in front of you. And the woman who did it blamed you. A child would scream. An adult would scream. You were 11. You did exactly what you should have done. It took 3 weeks before Cassian could sit under the yew tree and not cry, before she could talk about her father without her throat closing, before she could think about Isolde without rage. And then, on the 22nd day, Brenna said, now, let's see the light. It came easier the second time. Cassian held out her hands, thought about the meadow, about Declan lunging, about the heat rushing up her arms, and the light bloomed, soft, gold. Filling her palms like water, Brenna smiled. Good. Now hold it. Don't push. Don't pull. Pull. Just hold. Cassian held for 10 breaths, 20, 30, until her arms began to shake. And then Brenna said, let go. And the light faded. That, Brenna said, is control, not force, not panic. Control. Over the next month, Cassian learned to call the light without fear, to hold it without draining herself, to use it to close small wounds, a scrape on a child's knee, a dog's torn pad, a bird's broken wing. And every evening, she would sit on the bench under the yew tree, and Matthias would come and sit beside her, and they would talk about small things, the weather, the city, the wolves that lived in the northern forests. And sometimes they would not talk at all, and that was good too. On the 43rd day, a letter arrived from the southern capital, sealed with the tribunal's mark. Matthias brought it to her himself. You don't have to read it, he said. Not if you're not ready. She took it, broke the seal. Right, Lady Isolde Ashford had been found guilty of the murder of Lord Ravenscroft, of prolonged slander and false imprisonment of his daughter, of conspiracy with 2 minor southern lords, for the assassination of King Matthias 6 years prior, and of attempted murder by means of the hunt offering. The sentence was exile. Cassian looked up. Exile, she said. Not execution, Matthias said. The tribunal asked for your input. You sent a letter. Recommending mercy. She blinked. I did. He handed her a second piece of paper in her own handwriting, which she did not remember writing, but must have, because there it was. I ask that Lady Isolde be shown mercy, not because she deserves it, but because killing her will not bring back my father, will not heal what she broke. I choose to break the cycle. She stared at the letter, then at Matthias. Did I write this? He said. You did. 3 weeks ago. You were not entirely awake at the time. Brenna had given you tea for the nightmares. You sat up, asked for paper, wrote this, and went back to sleep. She laughed. It came out sharp, almost hysterical. I don't remember, he said. Brenna said the heart remembers what the mind forgets. She set the letter down and thought about Isolde on a ship sailing away from everything she had ever known, alone, exiled, alive. But broken. Good, she said, and meant it. Winter came, and with it, the first snow. Cassian had never seen snow like this. Soft and thick and covering everything in white. She stood at her window and watched it fall. And Matthias came up behind her, careful not to touch, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. First snow, he said. She said, I've never seen it like this, he said. In the south, it's different. Wetter, heavier. Here. It's light, like ash. She turned to look at him. Do you like it? He considered. I like that it's quiet. And that it makes the world look new. She smiled. You're a poet. He snorted. I am a king who cannot repoint a well true. They stood in silence. Then he said, very quietly, May I take you somewhere? He took her to the hall. The great hall at the center of Thornwell, where the pack gathered, where the fires burned, where the stories were told. It was full, not with nobles, but with people, farmers, blacksmiths, weavers' children running between the tables. Dogs sleeping by the hearth, and at the center of it all, a boy, Pen, the boy who had given Matthias the wooden wolf, standing on a table telling a story, and then, Pen said, his voice high and excited, the girl came out of the trees. And the king, he didn't move, didn't say nothing, just looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world. The crowd was silent, listening. Pen grinned, and the wolf won, the way my Nan always said. But not by killing. By choosing, the hall erupted in cheers. And Cassian, standing at the edge in Matthias' too large cloak, felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had not known was there. Matthias leaned down, whispered in her ear, That's you. That's the story they're telling. She looked up at him. They don't even know me, he said. They know enough. And then Pen saw her, and his face lit up, and he jumped off the table and ran over. And before she could say anything, he had grabbed her hand and was pulling her toward the fire. Come on! You have to hear the rest. And Matthias, behind her, laughed, low and quiet, and let her be pulled away. That night, she kissed him in the courtyard under the yew tree, with the badly repointed well behind him. And the yew dropping its little red barbries into her hair, his hands came up and cradled her face, as if she were a thing he was afraid to bruise, and she felt the bond in her chest, the one she had not let herself name, go from steady note to chord. And the chord was a thing she had no name for yet. And that was all right, because she would have time. Time was the thing she had been given, time to know him, time to be known. Spring came slowly to Thornwell. First the snow melted, then the mud, then the first green shoots pushed through the earth in the courtyard. And Cassian, standing at her window watching them, realized she had been in the north for 6 months. On the first day of true spring, a letter came, not from the south, from the west, from a place Cassian had never heard of. A small village called Millhaven. Matthias brought it to her himself. His face was strange, not worried, not exactly. But something close. This came for you, he said. She took it, broke the seal. Ride to the warden of Thornwell. My name is Osric. I am the headman of Millhaven. We have heard stories of a woman who healed with light, who walked out of a forest chosen. We have need of such a woman. There is a sickness here. The physicians cannot cure it. The healers cannot stop it. Children are dying. If you have the gift, we beg you. Come. Cassian looked up. Millhaven, she said. Where is that? Matthias said. 3 days west. Small village. Farming community. Good people. She looked back at the letter. Children are dying, yes, and they want me to come. Yes, she set the letter down and felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not exactly. But something close. I've only been training for 6 months, she said. I can close small wounds, heal a dog's paw. I don't know if I can, Matthias cut her off gently. You are the daughter of Riel Ravencroft, who healed a plague village alone. You have more in you than you know. She looked at him. What if I fail? He said. Then you fail, but you will have tried. That is more than most ever do. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, I want Brenna to come with me. He nodded. I will ask her and you. He blinked. Me? Yes. He looked at her, and something in his face softened. I would go to the ends of the earth with you, Cassian Ravencroft. Millhaven is barely a start. They left 2 days later. Cassian, Matthias, Brenna, and Willa, who had insisted on coming. You'll need a healer who knows medicine, she had said. In case the light isn't enough, they reached Millhaven on the 3rd day. It was smaller than Cassian had expected. Maybe 50 houses, a single street, a well at the center, and at the far end, a small stone building that might have been a meeting hall. The village was quiet. No children playing in the street, no voices calling from the houses. Just silence and the smell of sickness. Sweet and rotting, a man came to meet them. Old gray-haired, stooped Warden Brenna, he said. His voice was hoarse. Brenna dismounted. Osric? It has been a long time, he nodded. 20 years. Since you came for the fever that took my wife? He looked at Cassian. And this is the daughter, Brenna said. Cassian Ravencroft. Riel's child. Osric's eyes filled. Riel. I remember her. She came here once, when I was a boy. Healed my sister of a lung sickness. Wouldn't take payment. Just asked for a loaf of bread and a place to sleep. He looked at Cassian. You have her eyes. Cassian did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Osric gestured toward the stone building. The sick are in there. 12 children, ranging from 4 to 14. Started 2 weeks ago. Fever, cough, then the rash, then he swallowed. 2 have died already. The smell hit her first, not just sickness, but fear and grief and something else underneath, something old and wrong. The children were lying on pallets, 12 of them. As Osric had said, some crying, some silent, some shaking with fever, and all of them covered in a rash that looked like burns. Cassian knelt beside the nearest child, a girl, maybe 6, with dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Hello, Cassian said softly. The girl did not respond or daunt. Her eyes were half open. Unfocused, Willa knelt beside her, checked her pulse, her breathing, the rash on her arms. This is not a wasting sickness, Willa said quietly. This is poisoning. Brenna looked up sharply. What kind? Willa pointed to the rash. See the pattern? Like fingertips? That's contact poisoning. Something they touched or ate. She looked around the room at the other children. All of them, Osric said. All of them played in the old mill 2 weeks ago. The mill has been abandoned for years. We tell the children not to go near it. But children do not listen. Brenna stood. Show me the mill. The mill was at the edge of the village, built of stone, half collapsed with a wheel that had not turned in decades. And inside, the floor was covered in black mold and broken crates and shattered glass. Brenna knelt, picked up a piece of glass, sniffed it. Her face went pale. Nightshade extract, concentrated. Someone was making poison here years ago. And the children played here, touched the glass, breathed the spores from the mold. And now they are dying, Cassian said. Can the light heal poison? Brenna looked at her. I don't know, Riel never tried. But you are not Riel. And this is not her path. It is yours. They went back to the stone building, and Cassian knelt beside the girl with the dark hair, and put her hands on the child's fevered forehead, and closed her eyes, and called the light. It came, slowly at first, then faster, filling her palms, warm gold. She let it pour into the child, and felt the poison like black threads running through the girl's veins, tangled, choking, killing. She reached for the threads with the light and began to pull. It was like pulling thorns. Each one hurt, each one resisted, but she pulled anyway, one by one, until the black threads began to loosen and the light began to spread, and the girl's breathing eased. Cassian opened her eyes. The girl was sleeping, really sleeping, not the half-conscious fever sleep, but deep and peaceful. And the rash on her arms was fading. Willa checked her pulse. Stronger, she said. Fever's breaking. She looked at Cassian. It's working. Cassian looked at the other 11 children and felt something settle in her chest. Not confidence, not exactly, but something close. Then let's keep going, she said. It took 3 days of kneeling beside pallets, of calling the light, of pulling black threads from small bodies, of collapsing into bed at night so exhausted she could barely speak. But on the third day, all 12 children were sitting up, eating, talking, laughing, and the rash was gone. Osric wept. He knelt in front of Cassian and tried to kiss her hand. She pulled it away. "Don't," she said. "Please don't." He looked up at her. Tears streaming. "You saved them. You saved all of them," she said. "I did what my mother would have done. That's all." He shook his head. "No, you did what you chose to do. That is more. They stayed one more day to make sure the children were truly well, and to burn the mill so that no other child would play there and be poisoned. And on the morning of the 5th day, as they were preparing to leave, a woman approached. Young, maybe 20, with a baby in her arms. "Warden," she said, her voice shaking. "My daughter. She was not in the mill, but she has been sick since birth. The physician say she will not live past her first year." "Can you?" Cassian looked at the baby, small, pale, breathing too fast. She looked at Brenna. Brenna said quietly, "Birth defects are not the same as poison. The light may not work," Cassian said. "May I try?" The woman handed her the baby, and Cassian held the tiny thing in her arms and called the light and let it pour into the child. And she saw not black threads, but something else, a valve in the heart, not quite closed, not quite open, letting blood go where it should not. She reached for it with the light and very, very carefully nudged it into place. The baby gasped once, and then her breathing slowed, deepened, and her color began to improve. Cassian handed her back to her mother. "Keep her warm. Feed her often." "She will be all right now," the woman sobbed, and clutched the baby to her chest. Cassian felt her arms shake, her vision blur. She had pushed too far this time. Willa caught her before she fell. "Easy," Willa said. "Easy. You've done enough." They rode back to Thornwell in silence. Cassian was too tired to speak, too tired to think. She had saved 13 children, 13. And she did not know how to hold that, did not know how to carry it. On the second night, Matthias found her sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He sat beside her, did not speak, just sat. After a long while, she said, "My mother did this all the time," he said. "Yes, how did she bear it? I don't know. But I know she had help. She had Brenna. She had your father. She was not alone." Cassian looked at him. "Am I alone?" He said no, and took her hand and held it. And they sat like that until the fire burned down to embers. Summer came, and with it more letters from villages across the north, asking for the warden, asking for Cassian. She did not go to all of them. Some Brenna handled, some Willa handled with medicine. But the ones that needed the light, Cassian went. And Matthias went with her every time. And slowly over the months, the people began to call her by a name, not Warden, not Riella's daughter, but Cassian the Lightbringer. She hated it. It felt too grand, too heavy, too much like something she had not earned. But Brenna said, "Names are not earned. They are given by the people who see you. And they see you, child, whether you want them to or not." And then in late summer, a different letter came, not from a village, not from a farmer, from the southern capital, from the tribunal. Matthias brought it to her in the courtyard, where she was sitting under the yew tree, watching the light move through the leaves. "This is for you," he said. His voice was strange. She took it, broke the seal. "Ride, Lady Isolde Ashford is dead. She succumbed to fever on the 18th day of the 7th month. In her final hours, she requested that a message be sent to Cassian Ravencroft. The message is as follows: Tell Cassian I am sorry I could not be my sister." Cassian stared at the letter. "Write it again and again," and felt something crack open in her chest. Not relief, not grief, not exactly. Something in between. Matthias sat beside her. "Are you all right?" She did not know how to answer that, so she said, "She's dead?" "Yes." "And she was sorry?" "Yes." Cassian set the letter down. "I don't know what to do with that." Matthias said, "You don't have to do anything with it. You can just let it be." She looked at him. "Is that enough?" "I think so." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat under the yew tree and watched the light move through the leaves. Fall came, and with it, a decision. Cassian stood in the great hall, in front of Matthias and Brenna and Willa and Penn, who was now 9 and had appointed himself her unofficial assistant. "I want to build something," she said. They looked at her waiting. She took a breath. "A school for healer wardens. Not just me, not just Brenna, but anyone with the gift, anyone who wants to learn. So that the next time a village needs help, there are more than 2 of us." And Brenna smiled slow and wide. "Your mother wanted that too. But she never had the time. Or the safety, Cassian said. I have both. Because of Matthias. Because of you. Because of the forest choice. I want to use it, Matthias said. Where? She pointed out the window to the courtyard, to the yew tree. There. We build around the tree. A small hall with rooms for students. And a place to practice. And a library for the knowledge we've lost, Penn said. Cassian laughed. You don't have the gift, Penn, he said. But I can learn other things. How to help, how to carry, how to be useful. She ruffled his hair. Then yes, you can come. Matthias stood cross to her, took her hands. If you do this, you will be painting a target on yourself. On all of us. There are still those who fear healer wardens, who remember the burning, who will see this as a threat, Cassian said. I know. And you want to do it anyway? Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, then we will build it. Together, the school took a year to build. It was not large, just a single stone hall, with 6 small rooms and a library and a courtyard at the center, where the yew tree grew. And in the spring of the following year, the first students arrived, 3 of them. A girl of 12 who could close wounds with a touch. A boy of 15 who could sense sickness before it showed. And a woman of 40 who had hidden her gift her whole life and wanted to learn to use it. Cassian taught them what Brenna had taught her. To breathe, to center, to call the light without fear, and to let it go without grief. And Brenna taught them the history, the long line of wardens who had come before, and what they had done and what they had cost. And Willa taught them medicine so that they would know when the light was not enough, and when other tools were needed. And Penn, true to his word, learned to help, to carry supplies, to keep the library organized, to run messages between the school and the city, and to tell stories. Because stories, Brenna said, were how knowledge survived. 2 years after the school opened, Cassian stood in the courtyard, pregnant, 7 months, watching a young girl practice calling the light. The girl was struggling. The light kept flickering out. I can't do it, the girl said, frustrated near tears. Cassian said, yes, you can. You're just trying too hard. The light is not something you force. It's something you allow. The girl tried again. And this time the light held soft and steady. She looked up at Cassian. Eyes wide. I did it. Cassian smiled. Yes, you did. Matthias appeared at the edge of the courtyard with a small child on his hip, Wild, 18 months old, dark-haired, gray-eyed, with her father's stubborn chin and her mother's laugh. Wild saw Cassian and reached for her, babbling. Matthias crossed to her, handed Wild over carefully. She's been asking for you all morning. Cassian kissed Wild's forehead. Have you, little bird? Wild grabbed a strand of Cassian's hair, pulled, lawed. Matthias winced. She has your grip, Cassian said, and your timing. Always interrupting when I'm teaching? He grinned. I learned from the best. He looked at the students in the courtyard, 12 of them now, ranging from 9 to 50, all learning, all growing. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly. Cassian said, I hope so. That night, a letter arrived. Not from a village, not from the tribunal, from the west, from a place Cassian had never heard of. A city called Greymarch. The letter was short and unsigned, and it said, we know what you are building. We know what you are teaching. The wardens nearly destroyed us once. We will not let it happen again. Stop, or we will stop you. Cassian read it twice, then handed it to Matthias. He read it. His face went hard. This is a threat, yes, against you. Against the school, yes. He looked at her. What do you want to do? She thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, nothing. He blinked, nothing. They want me to be afraid, to stop, to hide. I will not give them that, he said. They may come, she said. Let them come. We are not the wardens of 50 years ago. We are not burning forests. We are healing children. If they cannot see the difference, that is their failing, not ours. Matthias looked at her, and something in his face shifted. You terrify me sometimes, Cassian Ravencroft. In the best way, she smiled. I learned from a king who repoints wells badly and refuses to give up. He laughed and pulled her close and kissed her. The threat did not come, not that year, not the next. But Cassian knew it would eventually, because fear did not die easily and old wounds did not heal without scars. But until then, she taught, she healed, she raised her daughter. And when the second child came, a boy they named Gareth, after the kennel master who had taught her to think like a hound, she did it all again. And on the quiet days when the students were practicing and the children were napping and the world was still, she would sit under the yew tree with Matthias beside her and the wooden wolf on the bench between them, and she would think about her mother And she would think about Isolde and the woman she could have been and the cycle that had been broken. Not with vengeance, not with violence, but with mercy and choice. And the slow, patient work of building something new. One evening, Wild, now 3, climbed into Cassian's lap and pointed at the scar on Cassian's calf. Where the bramble had caught her on the day of the hunt? What's that, Mama? Cassian looked at the scar, faint now, but still there. That's from the day I ran through the bullets, all she said. Wild's eyes went wide. The forest that chose you? Yes. Wild traced the scar with one small finger. Did it hurt? Cassian thought about it. Yes, it hurt, but it also saved me, because it taught me that I was stronger than I thought. Wild nodded, very serious, like the light. Cassian smiled. Yes, like the light, Matthias, sitting beside them, said quietly, tell her the rest. Cassian looked at him. What rest? That you saved me first. Before I ever saved you. Cassian looked at Wild. Ho was watching her with wide gray eyes. When I was 11, Cassian said, a wolf came into my kennel. He was hurt badly, and I helped him. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help. And years later, that wolf came back, and he helped me. Wild said, was the wolf Papa? Matthias grinned. Yes. Wild looked delighted. Papa was a wolf? Still am sometimes. Wild thought about that, then said, can I be a wolf? Cassian said, maybe. When you're older, if the gift passes to you, Wild said. I want to be a warden, like you. Cassian's throat tightened. Then you will be. If that's what you choose. That night, after the children were asleep, Cassian stood at her window, looking out at the courtyard, at the yew tree, at the school, at the city beyond. Matthias came up behind her, put his arms around her, rested his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking? She said. I'm thinking that 6 years ago I was in a kennel, and I thought that was all I would ever be. A kennel girl. Half-mad. Dangerous. Broken in now? She turned in his arms, looked up at him. Now I am a warden. A mother, a teacher, a woman who chose mercy over vengeance and love over fear, and I am not broken. I never was, he kissed her, soft and slow, he said. You never were, and far to the west, in the city of Greymarsh, a man sat in a dark room, reading a report about a school, about a warden, about children learning to heal. He set the report down and smiled, a cold smile. Let her build, he said to the shadows, let her gather them all in one place. It will make it easier. When the time comes. But in Thornwell, under the yew tree, Cassian did not know about the man in the dark room. She only knew that the light in her hands was steady, that the students were learning, that her children were safe, and that the man beside her had ridden 6 years looking for a scent he could not name, and found it. That night, when the stars came out, Cassian sat on the bench under the yew, with Matthias on one side, and Wild on the other, and Gareth asleep in her arms. And the wooden wolf on the bench beside them, Matthias said. The wolf won, Cassian said. Yes, but not the way anyone thought. No, not the way anyone thought. Wild said sleepily. Tell me the story again, Mama, Cassian said. Which story? The one about the girl and the wolf. And the forest that chose her. Cassian looked at Matthias. He smiled. She began. Once there was a girl who lived in a kennel, and she was told she was dangerous and broken and mad. But she was none of those things. She was only afraid. And alone, and waiting for someone to see her, and Wild listened, and Gareth slept, and Matthias held Cassian's hand, and the yew tree dropped its red berries into the night, and the stars turned overhead. And somewhere, far to the west, the man in the dark room made his plans, but here, in this moment, under this tree, in this city, built on old stones and older promises, there was only peace, and a girl who had run through a forest, and lived, and chose to build something that would outlast her.